Powercat Game Day Postgame. Corey Dean, John Kurtz on the road. Cole Manbeck couldn't join us this morning. He had a work emergency. He's a big deal. I don't know if you know this, but so he had other stuff that he had to tend to. Real big kid jobs today. Hey, listen, John, first of all, thanks for joining on the road back from Kansas City. But watching this one yesterday was a tough one for Cat fans. 45-0 is brutal, but it could have been worse almost. This one got out of hand early for K-State. So, I mean, I don't want to give it 45 minutes on a 45-0 win, but I think the big question coming out of this one, is this game more to you a result of the attrition between players leaving and COVID and being shorthanded, or is this more performance that now you kind of have to be concerned about where K-State is?
I think it's a little bit of both. I know that I've been a guy that's pretty positive and high on the coaching staff through a lot of things, and there have been a lot of ups and downs since they got here. And I still think ultimately Chris Kleiman is going to be successful. I don't think it's fair to completely judge where the program's at based on this one game, right? I mean, they still have accomplished a lot in their time in Manhattan. They are dealing with a true freshman quarterback because they lost their sixth-year senior starter this year. They did have a COVID outbreak that wiped out their two starting linebackers when you're going up against the best running back in the country in Breece Hall. There are a lot of things that were working against them in this game. However, at the same time, I also look at it and say that is as overmatched as K-State's looked in a football game since the 2018 or 2015 Oklahoma game. Take your pick, whichever one of those you like. I tend to go 2018 Oklahoma, feeling more helpless with Kyler Murray and company putting up 700 plus yards on offense. But man, I mean, those are the caliber games where K-State just was not. Could have been much worse than 45-0 if that came at all. So some of that is attrition, whether it's been guys like Josh Youngblood or players like Malik just not this year and not having enough offensive weapons. But man, I mean, it should look better than that. Like, you should at least be able to feel like you pose some sort of threat when your offense has the ball. So it is, combined with everything that's happened with all the transfers and stuff, enough to make me take a step back and say, all right, there are going to need to be some changes made here, and this is kind of a reality check game to see where you're at as a program and what needs to happen right now, because there's been enough that even I would concede right now. I think the coaching staff is going to have.
Yeah, so, I kind of tend to be in the same spot as you, John. It's like, early on in the season, you got the big win over Oklahoma. You absolutely got Oklahoma at the right time, proven by what we saw yesterday, where they kind of just handled Oklahoma State pretty easily. They're getting better. Iowa State's obviously getting better. The rest of the league's kind of been muddled in the middle. And K-State's been able to hold on. I mean, you lose against West Virginia, but that wasn't a great game, but at least there were a few positives. You were right in there till the end and actually had a couple chances against Oklahoma State. If that weird fumble goes your way, who knows where that one ends up. This one was just a bad performance. As you look forward, though, now potentially you've got maybe a change at quarterback coming. Howard really had his worst game and looked like he's maybe lost some confidence between the end of the Oklahoma State game and this contest yesterday with Iowa State. So maybe Ask comes in at quarterback. I'm not sure where other changes happen. You get a Baylor team that just lost on a last-second field goal 2 weeks ago, and then Texas to end the year. So you have winnable games potentially, but it seems like momentum has fully swung the opposite direction of where you were when you won 4 games in a row after a bad performance to open the year.
That's the problem, man. It has been such a roller coaster ride, which is pretty much what we had last year, right? Just a total roller coaster ride of wins and losses. And unfortunately now you're seeing the biggest downturn that the program has had here. Because, at one point, I mean, I remember the narrative going to West Virginia was like, hey, if you win this game, you're in total prime position to make the Big 12 championship game based on what was coming up. And West Virginia felt like a really winnable game. Everyone was perplexed why K-State was I think it was like a 4-point underdog going into that game. And now that just feels like eons. Because since then, had losses, things looking progressively worse at quarterback with Howard. And then, some other guys leaving the program. And it's just been, I think, feels like for Chris Kleiman, I'm sure, like something different every day that he's having to deal with. That whether it is a report coming out about a player transferring that might transfer, or it's guys that are actually leaving, or it's COVID. There's just so much that's been lumped on them outside of just football. And that came out really in the post-game press conference. I thought that was the most interesting part of yesterday was Chris Kleiman and Cody Fletcher admitting, like, hey, there are accountability issues right now. And, Cody Fletcher said the message from Kleiman was, hey, we can't have guys quitting on us. We can't have guys leaving on us. And, to hear those sorts of things actually coming out right now to me was pretty telling that, this isn't something you can just totally cover up and sweep under the rug right now. I mean, there are definitely some issues there and some things that are going to have to be fixed. And again, I would cut them some slack based on what's happening in a pandemic in these different scenarios. The fact that kids can now leave and know that they'll get a year free without any kind of penalty of having to sit out because of the legislation that's going to be finalized in January. So there's a lot that they're working against, but at the same time, it's a lot of players that have left, and at some point you do have to have bodies actually out there on the field, go out and play and perform for you. And unfortunately, right now they're in a pretty tough spot as far as that goes.
Well, I think, not that you throw everything into what you see online, but obviously the K-State fan base felt awfully defeated pretty early on, and this one online. And hey, I get it; it's a bad one. But you mentioned the post-game press conference. What was your feeling, John, in post-game as that was going on? I mean, it seemed like the players themselves and the coaching staff are struggling to get any kind of juice going as well.
Yeah, it was pretty short and sweet. And Kleiman, I always say this, is pretty unflappable when things like that happen, whether it's a positive or a negative. Like, he's not somebody that's going to get too high or too low. And I think that was still the case, but it was definitely the most somber I've seen him. He still projected, I think, a decent amount of confidence, but you can just tell things are wearing on him. And that's the second time I've said that this season. I remember saying that, I think, after Arkansas State heading into Oklahoma. It already felt like that because they had, like, the issue with the Black Lives Matter patches at the beginning of the year that they were getting really hit on from a bunch of fans. And I think some of the issues that we're seeing now with the team and some of these players, they knew about early on. And I remember hearing some of that early on, that there were some guys, frankly, that they needed to get rid of. And also that there were just a number of guys not doing the things that they needed to do. I think that's a big part of why you haven't seen, like, alternate uniforms and some of those things this year, that there have been some schisms as far as leadership goes with this team throughout the year, but it's all been a lot fueled by just the current conditions we're in with the pandemic and social justice, everything that was happening over the summer. So, and I guess that's a long way of saying I think Kleiman is okay, but you can tell that there's just a lot on his plate right now, and I thought that came out in the press conference. And we also talked to Deuce Vaughn, and he admitted to some of that stuff as well. But I thought he was very, as he always is, mature and put a lot of it on himself, saying, like, hey, I've got to be a better leader, even though I'm just a freshman. Like, I am somebody that the guys will listen to, and I need to make sure that I'm holding guys more accountable. So that was kind of the vibe and the message. It was nothing like terrible gloom and doom, but it definitely felt like it was a locker room and a team that realizes that they kind of needed a come to Jesus sort of meeting.
Yeah. So an interesting take on that is, we've talked throughout the season that this team's really young, and they've got a lot of guys that don't have a ton of experience when adversity hits. Is it interesting potentially, John, that you also have a coaching staff that's not used to being in the scenario either? I mean, let's be honest, their run at North Dakota State is pretty much win after win after win after win in national championships. So it's a little bit different spot for even this coaching staff to be in, as far as, like, how do you adjust? How do you rally? They haven't been in spots where you go on 3 and 4 game losing streaks.
Yeah, because last year it was back-to-back losses that would happen. They didn't hit 3 straight, and it didn't hit quite the low that this has been with just everything else happening within the program. So there is some truth to that for sure. I think what they would tell you is, one, that they did lose some games and have some bleak outlooks at points last year. And also, you have guys like Van Malone, who's the associate head coach. He's been around for a while and been in a lot of different places, Oklahoma State, SMU, where he has an idea of how to try and rebound and rally the troops. And I think he's a pretty strongly listened to voice in that locker room. I think a lot of guys really respect him. So I think that is definitely something you can point to and say, hey, here's a guy that's been through things like this. And I'm sure if you went down the coaching staff, like there would be other guys that could tell you, like, hey, we went through some really tough times here. I mean, heck, Colin Klein at K-State, through Bill Snyder at the end of Snyder 2.0, there were some rough times in there also. But it will be very interesting to see how they do rebound. Because right now, after things look great a month ago, it's completely turned around. And, I think a lot of this is going to come down to like roster management. How do you, to me, like the bigger picture questions right now facing the staff that I would be thinking a lot about if I were them is like, what are we doing at receiver in the future? Like, what's the scholarship situation here at receiver? And are we going to go get some grad transfers or JUCO transfers or something to try and plug some holes here? Or what's our plan at developing receivers? Because they are not developing right now. What's our plan at linebacker? Not much there in terms of young linebackers right now. I mean, those are the things that start to become accentuated to me in the aftermath of a loss like that, because a loss like that really exposes some of the bigger personnel issues that you have and things that are easier to ignore and say, oh, they'll figure it out. And right. Now, it doesn't look like they're figuring some of those things out.
Well, and tough this year just because of the way that recruiting works with all the COVID restrictions and things like that. So it kind of amplifies that a little bit. As you look ahead, I mean, you get a Baylor team that's kind of reeling as well. One win. They took a tough loss 2 weeks ago. They're coming off a bye week. You'd love for that game to be at home as opposed to in Waco, but that's a pretty winnable game. I mean, if there's going to be a get well game, you'd think that Baylor Bear would be it.
After watching K-State play the way that they did yesterday, it's hard to.
They think K-State's the get well game, right?
Looking at it like that, with Iowa State a couple of weeks ago, maybe should have won that game. Brock Purdy was pretty bad in the first half, gave him 3 turnovers, and Baylor still couldn't hang on after being spotted that lead. So, yeah, it's hard to say that K-State should be the favorite in that game right now. I don't know if I were Vegas where I would put that. You mentioned a quarterback controversy. It's like, yeah, I don't know who's going to play quarterback for K-State. I don't know what the real answer is right there. Will Howard looks like he's going backwards. Do you keep trying to develop him as you move forward? Is he the future at quarterback? You play Nick Ost. That's definitely a move more to win now as opposed to develop for the future. And I know even some were questioning why not bring in Jaron Lewis instead of Nick Ost against Iowa State just to see what he's got. I understood it in that game against Iowa State because it felt like you put in Jaron Lewis and he is completely erratic and is throwing picks and stuff. I mean, you could find yourself losing 65-0, and I think there's value in not losing by that kind of margin. But now that you have a week off and time to prepare and go play, I don't know, maybe Jaron Lewis does become more a part of the conversation. I don't know. There's so many questions and so much uncertainty right now that's been thrown into it. Kleiman said he's not expecting right now. He doesn't know for sure anyway whether or not they'll get some of these guys back COVID-wise. So, who knows if you'll have Elijah Sullivan and Justin Hughes. It's far from certainty. Man, I don't know. I mean, I can't tell you that I feel great about them going to win, but this coaching staff has proven me wrong a number of times, including just a couple of weeks ago against Oklahoma State when they put them in position to win. So we'll see, but you can tell I don't feel great about it here.
Yeah. Well, as we finish up, I'm sure you're in a hustle to get home in time because NFL schedule this week is pretty good, including your Kansas City Chiefs in a revenge game scenario against the Oakland Raiders. Oakland won in Kansas City and did a little bit of a victory lap after that game. Seems like KC's a little bit amped up to roll into the Death Star there in Vegas and put one on the Raiders. I expect a lot of points. You?
Yeah, that's gotten a lot of run this week, which I've enjoyed. I was some extra storylines like that to be mixed in. John Gruden's reaction to it was pretty hilarious as well. You gotta, it feels like a take your medicine kind of a game for the Raiders because I get it how jacked up they were to win that game, and they should have been earlier this year because they just nobody in the AFC West ever beats the Chiefs, but you also have to know what's coming now. What's coming is a revenge spot for the Chiefs, plus Andy Reid against a divisional opponent, plus Andy Reid off of a bye. I mean, that's a pretty bad combination for opponents typically. So, like, I do not have much doubt at all that the Chiefs are going to come out and win this game, especially when, Oakland has spent the week with pretty much their entire defense on the COVID list, trying to figure out what's going on there, guys not being able to practice, and it seems like it's been a very disjointed week. I know the Chiefs dealt with some of that too, with in particular the offensive tackles both being on there, but it's been worse for the Raiders. So everything right now would tell me that the Chiefs win pretty comfortably today and get their revenge.
Yeah, that's where I am too. I think take the over. All right, man. Drive safe. Thanks for sneaking in for a couple minutes. Hopefully things go well over at the Casa del Manbeck, and we can catch up with Cole next week. And let's hope this is a little bit better result after the Cats trip to Waco this next time around. Have a good weekend, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. You too.